This is a screencast designed to help students preparing for examinations based on the play An Inspector Calls by J.B. Priestley. The title comes in essence from an examination question from the January 2014 exam set as part of the edXL certificate, but I hope what I'm going to do is to lay out in no more than 10 minutes the steps by which I would plan this title. Now you'll have to excuse the fact that I'm working on a PowerPoint, because it means that you will see things on the screen that you probably wouldn't write in an exam. So, we've got a title. Do you find An Inspector Calls to be an effective title? And we have to go into this. We know we've got about 10 minutes to plan and therefore about 35 minutes to write. And so we need to think about, first of all, what this actually requires me to write about. I've got to focus on the title of the play, but it's more than that. If it's effective, in what sense? Does it do what the writer set out to do? Is of course one reading of effective. And I think if we look at this, we then end up at this stage with three slices of pie that we would want to focus on. The play as a whole, the play as a well-made play. If it's effective as a well-made play, it needs to show certain things, but also as a play we've got to engage an audience. So does this title help to engage the audience and relate to what actually is going to happen during the play? Might be a way that we move forward. We therefore start planning in order. First of all, we're thinking about the play. Is it effective as a play? Well, the first thing the title does is introduce us to a main character, and that is a character who is going to be essentially the protagonist of the play, a main character. Stage directions tell us that he's massive, content of the play tells us that he's powerful, and we also notice, remember from the initial stage directions, that on his entrance there is a lighting change, moving from the cosy pinks of the Burlings' home to a much starker, much more dramatic and intense, brighter lighting state. Again, all because of the inspector, this person who is highlighted in the title and is going to be the core of the entire play. Now, within this, how does he show his great character? Well, he challenges the social complacency of the Burlings, and again you will find evidence for that as you read, and my recommendation is you focus in terms of this on the clashes with Mr. and Mrs. Burling, and you'll find all sorts of moments where there is a requirement for people to behave in a certain way. Burling to perhaps flaunt his high status in the hope of frightening him, Mrs. Burling just constantly utterly offended by everything that he does. Nevertheless, he also works as the character who will develop others, and the most obvious one of these is Sheila. If it weren't for the inspector, Sheila would never undergo the massive change she does, which makes her the most interesting character in the play, I would argue. He tells us that often he has this effect, often, he's done it more than once, and the young are more impressionable. But the fact is that it is his appearance in the play, his call, that has caused one member of this complacent society to question the foundation of that society. This is important, and it is highlighted, therefore, in the title. Now, moving on, this is an exam after all, we're not being required to write in huge detail. We might want to consider the well-made play aspect. First of all, show off and make sure that you show the examiners not only that you know it is a well-made play, but that you know what a well-made play is, and you can now see it on the screen. And it's this question of moving from ignorance to knowledge at the same time that I think is so important. The carrier of all the knowledge in the play is the inspector. He is the person, you excuse the misprint that I've just seen, he is the person who, as Sheila says, he knows. He hasn't started on you yet. In one of her stage directions in Act 2, she stares at him wonderingly. There is a sense that this man carries all the knowledge, and it's his questioning, or at times his lack of questioning, which allows the family to display it to one another, so that they all learn at the same speed as do we. And this is probably best shown in the areas around Eric in Act 3. The opening of the act, you know, don't you? Picking up immediately where the previous act finished, hence going back to the beginning of the well-made play column there on the left, the unities of time and space. Let's recap. What do we know at this stage? We know that he is the father of the child, and we know, therefore, why Eva had chosen to call herself Mrs. Burling, though she was in no way being disrespectful. She was simply trying to use the name of the father of her child. Even at this stage, though, there are things we don't know, such as the theft of the money and so on. And it seems also in the play that this is the one area of the play about which, or about the plot, the content, if you like, about which Gould doesn't know either. But by this stage of the play, he has been able to bring everybody to a state of knowledge in relation to Eva. And so the play moves on. Now, has it been effective in terms of engaging the audience? I think it probably has. The play is called An Inspector Calls, but the inspector does not open the play. His entry is delayed, and thus anticipation for meeting him is increased. As he arrives, Burling asks, as does everybody in the audience, what sort of inspector? And Edna informs him it's a police inspector. Now, she's either wrong or she's been deliberately misinformed. Doesn't matter. The fact is, we're all learning together and our anticipation is growing. He also arrives after Burling's character has been very clearly established as a capitalist, an arrogant, bullying fool. Nobody can listen to his prophecies without thinking of him as foolish. And the inspector stands against that. He's a character of mystery, but we very quickly realise in Act 1, for example, that no crime has been committed. So we wonder why a police inspector might be involved at all. He has a tight control over everything that happens, and he knows so much about everything, even to the extent that Sheila in Act 2 is puzzled by him, and she says to him, I don't understand about you. He replies, there's no reason that you should. He controls everybody with the photograph. Nobody sees the photograph apart from the person being shown it, and actually the question raised by Gerald at the end of the play is perfectly valid. Was it all the same photograph? We will never know. There is total mystery to this man, and yet he is omniscient. He is never wrong. Burling prophesies a load of complete rubbish at the beginning of the play, relating to the Titanic or the First World War or what will become the General Strike with the rise of the Labour movement. Gould, in one memorable triplet of fire, blood and anguish, gets it right and speaks directly to an audience in 1945 watching this play set in 1912 who have lived probably through 2 world wars. We also notice that almost regardless of anything raised by any of the cast, or the characters rather, his response is, that's what I thought, or I'd been thinking the very same thing. He seems to know everything and is at the centre of everything that happens in this play. And so we may be thinking that we've done enough, but I think there's a little bit more. We've still got 2 or 3 minutes of time left. And I think we have to remember what Priestley is trying to do in this play. Priestley is writing a range of ideas. He's writing a morality play, a play teaching us right from wrong. Gould represents goodness. The family represents sins. I've covered that in many a screencast, podcast and piece of writing on my blog. And after the inspection that we've seen, the idea is, in the medieval sense of morality play, that somehow mankind has been saved. In other words, not just the family, but also the audience. The play is also a socialist manifesto. Priestley is clearly trying to convert the audience to his own socialist view. And in terms of this, Gould represents socialism against the capitalist Burlings. The Burlings are subjected to scrutiny by his visit, but so is the audience, and every audience member leaves the theatre thinking about what they've seen, and they do this because of the fact that the inspector does indeed call. Of course, he calls twice, because at the end of the play, a second inspector calls. The phone rings, and the whole sequence will start again, causing us all to be inspected again and to think about our responses to everything that we've watched. The title prepares us for both the visit and the Finally, we might want to think that the term inspector itself is gloriously unspecific. Almost everybody, when you give them a copy of this play, assumes that the inspector is a police inspector. It is such a common assumption. It is the one made by Edna, we assume, and or by Burling, and of course by Gerald when he's asking the policeman off stage during Act 3 whether there is anybody called Ghoul in the police force. But the whole point of the term inspector is that what it means is somebody who inspects. We have placed the police element onto it, just as the Burlings have. Priestley deliberately leaves it completely open. Therefore, it seems to me there's only one answer that we can give to the question of whether this is an effective title. I hope this has been useful. I hope you found material in it that has been useful. And I hope, if you're about to write this essay maybe as a practice, or looking at it as part of a give back, that you found material here that will help you write an essay effectively to suit your purposes. Thank you for listening.